Hi, everyone, and welcome to August Bright Talk Summit on virtual teams. This is Kendra Pink with KinderCare Education, and I'm here with Carolyn Waterfall, who's an organization and talent development consultant. And we're here to talk a little bit about building camaraderie and collaboration in remote teams. But first of all, let me go ahead and introduce our guest presenter. I met Carolyn Waterfall. We're both members of the Association for Talent Development and Training. And the first thing that struck me is she just has a great, welcoming, warm personality. Really feels like you've known her for years. And I really love that. And it's been a great experience interacting with her since we've met, because she just brings that warmth to all of the interactions that she has, which is great in her position as a consultant, because it means she's walking into organizations and teams and she's making them feel right at home. So tell us a little bit about your background, Caroline.
Well, Kendra, thank you. That was a lovely, warm welcome. I have done so many things in my career, and the things that I found most valuable and most rewarding are those that help people be more effective in their relationships at home and at work. And that's what I do, whether it's with high schools or hospitals or any organization. It's just been my delight to help people see things a little differently and give them tips and tools that allow them to be more effective.
Well, thank you very much. And in my role as an Employee Alliance partner with KinderCare Education, if you don't know anything about us, we have over 30,000 employees in 42 states. Our headquarters is in Portland, Oregon, and so the vast majority of our employees are what we would call remote, and many of our district and regional managers work from home, and that can bring a real challenge to any organization. So tell me a little bit about, what's important with virtual teams, and how important is that in this day and age?
Well, as you can imagine, we spend so much of our time interfacing with our computers because we get to do so much more. Our world is so much bigger and at the same time so much smaller. But the skills required to manage that sort of dichotomy are very, very important to be effective. And the things that virtual teams need to do, that in-person teams also need to do, but it becomes much more intentional in a virtual team, is to communicate effectively. They need to develop accountability and trust very intentionally, manage conflict and overcome challenges, and obviously get deliverables out the door. So what we're going to do today is talk about the first three, communicating effectively. We'll pick a top. We'll address something that I just love, is understanding learning preferences or learning styles to build rapport and virtual listening skills. And the thing that's so important about that is that when you're virtual, when you're using a computer to communicate, you have very different expectations of the people on the other end. So we'll talk about learning preferences and learning styles. We will also talk about an area that's critical, is managing conflict and overcoming challenges. And there are lots of variables in that category. We'll address giving and receiving feedback effectively, in person, over the phone, and via email or other electronic means. We're also going to talk a little bit about developing accountability and trust. And those are big words. Accountability and trust really can be intimidating words. You feel like there's something major you have to do. And what my goal here is to demonstrate how simple this process can be, and that you can do it without a lot of planning, and at the same time be very intentional and strategic about giving recognition, appreciation, and random acts of kindness to those you work with.
Well, this all sounds really great and really important when we are managing our virtual teams. And as we go throughout the webinar today, if you have questions, just right underneath of our presentation box there, you'll see Ask a Question. You can type anything in there, and we'll be also having a period of space at the end to ask Carolyn any questions that you may have. There's also a tab for attachments. We've attached a couple of great resources for you that we'll introduce a little bit later on. And if you have any technical issues or any problems with that, there's also a button right there that says click for help. You're welcome to do that, and Bright Talk will be able to jump on and help you out with any of that. So let's go ahead and start with the first topic here, and that is that we want to be able to communicate effectively, right?
Yeah, and particularly remote teams, we all have particular learning preferences. There are 3 modes generally that we use to gather and share information. We use our eyes, we use our ears, and we use our sense of touch. And the challenge is remotely, we're more focused on our eyes than any other mode. And we'll talk about each of these modes and how they impact our ability to communicate with each other. So the first, we give information the way we like to receive it. So if I am highly visual, I am very likely to send you an email. I'm very likely to use graphs and charts to give you information. I'm very likely to have a very structured way to present information so that other visuals will understand it very clearly. So let's talk about how do we know we're visual. Visual learners, and how to spot them.
Well, this is important because we need to understand how our teams learn, right? So
Absolutely.
what you just said is we give information how we would like to receive it.
Exactly.
And so understanding how our team is giving us information is going to be how they likely would like to receive it from us as their managers.
Exactly, and they'll be much more effective if they receive information in their preferred mode. Now, we all use our eyes, our ears, and our sense of touch every day, all day long. We each also have preferences. So the people who are primarily visual learners, they like books, they like reading, they like pictures, they like things to be orderly. They appreciate neat surroundings. They see details. These are the people who will edit your emails and tell you that you've got a lot of typos or whatever's going on. We visuals don't get directions orally. So, for example, if I'm on the phone and you're trying to give me directions to the nearest shopping center, and I'm not writing this information down, or I don't have a map, or Google's not up, I'm not using that information very effectively because my auditory sense is not my preferred mode. Visuals like to work puzzles. They draw symmetrical pictures. They often respond verbally in as few words as possible. So that gives you a sense of, is there anyone on your team that you recognize might be highly visual? In which case, you're going to send them emails rather than call them on the phone. You're going to make sure that they have handouts rather than simply giving them information verbally.
And that makes total sense to me. I'm thinking of people that I work with, and I'm like, oh, hey, I didn't think they were a visual learner, but that person always likes to send me a chart on their current sales progress rather than just giving me a number.
Exactly.
Which is a great example of how you can identify as someone that works virtually that maybe you don't see face-to-face very frequently is a visual learner.
Yep.
So how do we work with a visual learner?
Well, particularly the visual aspect of learning can be a very challenging environment for people who are not visuals. So you want to be able to, if you're not a visual learner, you may have stacks of things around your computer. All of the visuals behind you as people are looking at you during your Skype conversations. If you've got a bulletin board with lots of random stuff behind you, those kinds of things are going to be distracting to a visual learner.
I never really thought of that before. So what you're saying is even if I'm not a visual learner, if my office is cluttered or if I like a lot of things around me and I'm having a go-to meeting or a Skype call with one of my teams, that can actually be distracting for them,
Exactly.
even though it doesn't affect me personally.
Exactly. And the challenge is how do you meet your own needs and at the same time recognize other learning styles so that you can adapt and work together more effectively. So you might just have a blank wall that you turn your computer to rather than your bulletin board behind you.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that seems like a pretty easy adjustment to make. And I see there's a couple other options here, ways to make adjustments for the visual learner on our team.
And very important to do this. If you're working on the phone or even via Skype where you can see and hear, invite them when you're sharing new information to use a bright highlighter and make sure that you've sent them documents in advance, so that they have something to review. If there are people who like to print things out and use a highlighter to follow, or that you've sent them your documents electronically and they can have those on the side of the screen or on another screen, anytime you can create in-time visual experiences, you'll be doing both of you a real favor.
I never really thought about that before. I'm totally guilty of this, and that is I have a meeting with someone, and I will send them an email with the attachment, or I'll attach it to the meeting invite right 5 minutes before we're scheduled to speak. And I never really thought that might be impacting the people that I work with.
Brilliant insight. It's so important. And again, this is one of the challenges of remote teams, is doing things in advance so that they know what's coming up. You know, you can hand out things in an in-person meeting, and then they can work with it. But if you don't do that, you can't do that online the way you can in person. So really beautiful insight.
So I may have, a weekly meeting of 8 or 10 people, and to help everyone on the team, but especially the visual learners, having a deadline for, hey, if you have anything, an attachment or supporting documentation for this meeting that we're going to have, please have it by the day before at 2 p.m., as an example, can really help support those different styles of learning, but especially the visual learners.
Yes. And so you come back to the notion again that visual or remote teams require some real structure that in-person meetings don't necessarily require. So you really do have to think ahead. And that's one of the challenges of being part of a virtual team.
But there are other types of learners, too. So tell us a little bit about the next type, and that's people that learn better by hearing things.
Yes, and particularly in remote environments where these folks work, you all work in a fairly isolated way a lot of the time. And auditories in particular seem to be affected by this because they enjoy talking, and they process information by talking. They like to explain things in detail, verbally. They love to hear people laugh, so they'll tell jokes. They really thrive on that camaraderie, that feeling of connection. They sound out words well. Auditories are very good storytellers. They're great at giving relevant examples for what they're talking about. The challenge, though, is they may need to tell the whole story from the beginning if they're interrupted, because they think in chunks, in sort of a full story. And if they are interrupted, it's a real challenge to pick up in the middle. So, and again, as you noticed, for example, the challenge here is visual learners, they speak in as few words as possible. They like things to be short and sweet. And visual learners can be a real challenge to auditory folks because visual learners come across as being impatient. They want that story to be shorter.
Yeah, I can think of a perfect example for this where, I asked someone how a meeting with the client went, and they had to start from the very beginning of their day. Oh, I woke up late, and then I had traffic was bad, and then I got there, and they weren't even showing up yet.
Exactly.
And all I really wanted to know was the meeting good or not?
Yeah.
Did we get what we wanted out of it? And
exactly.
so that was, I guess, a little frustrating for me because what took 10 minutes, I really wanted to take 2 sentences worth. So I would say that person was probably an auditory learner.
Yep.
And I love that you said, a good storyteller, they tell jokes, because I think we all know those people that we talk to that sort of have that gift.
Yeah. And the other thing that auditories, let's go back just one real quick. Something else that's important about auditories is that they're the kind of people who can listen to directions and repeat them back. They don't have to write them down. They don't have to see a map. And these are the kind of people that you do not want to have an argument. You don't want to fight about what you said last week, because the auditory is going to remember verbatim what you said, and you're going to remember what you meant.
Yeah.
And so then you're going to add another layer of conflict because you're arguing over what you said versus what you meant. So when you're working with auditories, they really do remember what you said. And it becomes that in itself, you can imagine, just adds another layer of frustration if you're not recognizing the learning style differences.
Absolutely. So as we've talked about these different sort of tell signs, so to speak, of who an auditory learner is, does this sound like someone on your team? Can you think maybe of an instance where you've been dealing with or working with an auditory learner on one of your teams, and now the pieces are coming together around like, oh, now that makes sense to me because I sure am.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is a visual will send an auditory an email, and the auditory will pick up the phone and call the visual. And as you described, the visual doesn't want a telephone call. The visual wants an email back.
Right.
And so already we've disrupted each other's mode of gathering information and elevated the frustration level. So, this is certainly not absolute by any means, but it gives you some hints about, if I send an email to an auditory, I'm likely to get a phone call back, and I'm gonna be able to manage that now because it's not, it's not as surprising and offensive as it might have been.
Absolutely. So how can we make some adjustments in our working environments for those that we manage, but also for our teams and helping them manage their own relationships with each other?
Great question. Relay new skills or information where it's quiet. So if, for example, your background is dogs barking and kids crying and, railroad trains going by.
I've been on those conference calls where I've heard all of those things.
So you want to be sure that you're in a quiet environment. Give them instructions orally. If you hand them a handout or send them an email, you want to follow up with a voicemail or a call and say, I just sent you an email that I'd really like you to look at. Because for auditories, and again, it's not absolute, but if it's important, you'll call. An auditory is thinking, if it's that big a deal, she'll call me because that's how you share important information.
And I'm an emailer. I mean, I will email, and I email at all hours of the day too. And I don't necessarily always expect an email back, but I definitely expect them to at least read it.
Yeah.
And maybe if they're auditory, they think, hey, this woman, she sends emails all the time. It's not that important.
And that's a possibility. And the challenge is, how do we manage that? And for our own, for visuals particularly, for our own mental health, we'll learn to let those auditories know via a voicemail or something that I just sent you something that I'd really like you to look at, because that's the connection, that's that relationship, that's that camaraderie and collaboration that we're talking about. If you have to repeat instructions to an auditory, use the same words each time, because an auditory is paying attention to the words, not just your intent. And if you explain something using particular words and they didn't quite get it, and you say something differently the second time, they'll say, you just told me two things. Which one do you want me to do, the first one or the second one? And in your mind, you've said the same thing twice.
Yeah, trying to clarify, but in their mind, they heard different things.
You've heard two different things, and so they have to make that translation. Speak directly to them. So if you're having a conversation in the corner hoping that they're paying attention, that's probably not the best way to get their information to them. Encourage them to talk out loud as they learn something new. Now, this is a challenge. Again, visuals they're not interested in hearing somebody talk to themselves.
Right.
And it's yet so very important for an auditory learner to have the freedom to do that. And then use hear words, like, how does that sound, or I hear what you're saying.
Absolutely. And then the third one that we talked about is a little bit about the learner that likes to touch things.
Yeah.
Now, I'm really trying to wrap my head around this in a virtual or a remote environment. What on earth? How am I going to tell if that's the type of learner they are?
Yeah.
But more importantly, how do I address that? How do I create an environment for them?
That's a great question, because it is a challenge, and at the same time, because we know that some members of our population, we're always going to have visuals in our audience, we're going to have auditories, and we're going to have kinesthetics. Rather than trying to guess what a specific person is, we're going to provide the information we share with people in all three modes. We're going to have handouts. We're going to talk them through it. And particularly when I say handouts, it could be email or electronic. We're going to allow them to type in questions. Their connection with the keyboard and their ability to ask questions and those kinds of things address some of that kinesthetic. Let's talk a little bit about spotting the kinesthetic in person first, and then you'll begin to see how it translates to that remote. So they want to touch and feel everything. These are people who, if they don't have something in their hand, they're reaching for something, or they're fidgeting, they're moving, they're very in touch with their physical selves. These are the folks who can take things apart and put them back together without reading the instructions. Makes visuals crazy to watch a kinesthetic do this, because they'll dump all the parts out on the floor and explore. And visuals, we're very interested in those words and that the paper instructions and reading the manual. And so that by itself creates some conflict. Kinesthetic learners may write things over and over, but they never look at their notes. They enjoy working with their hands, and they'll jump into a task rather than read a manual or go to a class. Now, you're not going to find too many kinesthetic learners, relatively, in remote environments, because to be happy in a remote environment, you're probably going to be auditory or visual. And at the same time, there are some kinesthetic folks who are very tactile, so the keyboard and those kinds of things are a draw to them.
So I'm thinking of a meeting that I had with a large virtual sales team that we have, and one of the gentlemen there, his name's David, and he likes to play with his pen. He
Yes.
has like a cush ball that he was like pulling in.
Perfect.
And so I'm thinking, hey, he's probably a kinesthetic learner.
Yep.
And now that I put sort of I understand that, now I can see why some of the email exchanges we've had, there's been some confusion, where I've said, hey, this is what I need you to do, and he's come back and not quite understood exactly what that was.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking of that. I'm sure that you guys that have joined us on the webinar here have also been able to take some of those tips and can now spot those kinesthetic learners you work with. How can we address that in a virtual environment? Now, to me, this seems like the hardest group. Would you agree?
I think so. Yeah, and so again, not just for kinesthetic learners, but particularly for kinesthetic learners, what you will want to do is find. I love snail mail for this reason. You can send little toys for them to play with, and not just them, but your whole remote team. Send them something kinesthetic that keeps them in touch with the rest of the group, that allows them to have something in their hands while they're listening or watching your Skype presentations or whatever else you're doing. Don't have them sit for too long. Make sure you give visual learners plenty of breaks. Use more hands-on teaching methods like skills practice. Walk them through a task. So again, via Skype and that kind of thing, talk them through as they're learning the new software or whatever it is virtually.
Well, let's use that as an example then. So let's say we're rolling out a new software tool that we want all of our team to adopt, and we have a voice conference call. So what you're saying is, hey, you need to have a webinar that's maybe showing the use of the software on the screen as they're walking through it, or maybe they have a split screen where they're actually in the software and doing it as you're walking them through the steps.
Absolutely. That would be a perfect way to address that. Yeah. So then allow them the freedom to jump in. These are the kind of people who are just going to, you'll be talking, and they're going to be doing what you're talking about already.
Okay.
And instead of being offended by that, which is our visual and auditory, our natural response is to be offended, like, pay attention to me. I'm talking. They're busy translating what you're saying into that physical experience so that they're not being disrespectful. They're not listening. They're trying to translate that visual or auditory input that they're getting from you into a kinesthetic experience that makes the information relevant. And I think that description right there is what important to all three of these styles, is that we are translating all the time. If I'm auditory and someone visual is handing me a document, I'm having to spend extra energy to read what I would really like to hear. And so that stress of translating all the time impacts the quality of our relationships. So if we can provide information visually, auditorily, and kinesthetically every time we make a presentation, we're going to meet more people's needs more of the time and save ourselves a lot of grief.
And I love this last item here that says it uses feel words, because as you've seen on the last couple of slides as well, if I'm a visual learner, I'm going to say, hey, I see what you mean.
Yep.
Whereas if I am an auditory learner, I might say something like, I hear what you are saying.
Exactly.
And so even the words that our team is using to interact with us can help us understand what type of learner they are.
Exactly. Those are clues to let you know how you might address them more effectively.
Great. And this is all really pointing towards, how can we use these tools to help us work with our teams better? So now we have a really good foundation, and Carolyn's provided us with a great document that you can download right there that has sort of a check mark box of each type of learner. And it's great for you to use with your teams and help them understand how everybody else in the team interacts and learns as well. It's going to give them a great foundation for understanding, hey, not just from a manager, employee level, but also employee to employee. Because ultimately, we want to be able to manage conflict, and we want to overcome those challenges that are inherent in any work environment, but they're especially acute when you're working virtually or remotely.
Absolutely. Yeah, anything you can do to minimize those conflicts by understanding the diversity in the environment makes a big difference.
So tell us a little bit about, the next section that we're going to talk about here. I see one of these items is bolded. So managing conflict and overcoming challenges. Are we going to focus on giving and receiving feedback?
Exactly. And one of the things that is so important about giving and receiving feedback is to have the courage to give it. First, there are some specific skills and techniques to present feedback effectively so that other people are very likely to hear you. And in addition to having those skills, having the courage to address something is we tend not to go there. You know, we're afraid of we're concerned about other people's strong emotions, and we have these biases that, well, we shouldn't have strong emotions in the workplace. Well, of course we do have strong emotions in the workplace. And
so I think that's why a lot of us resort to email, because it's hands off and it doesn't feel personal. But again, that also presents a challenge, because if I'm talking with someone or I'm sending an email to someone that maybe is an auditory learner, they may interpret that a little bit differently than if I was on the phone with them.
Exactly.
So that's your number one tip right here, is don't try to manage or address conflict through an email channel.
Absolutely not. Even if the other person is a visual. Do not address conflict or difficulties via email, because people, whether you like it or not, people read emails for the worst. They read them as though they're in all caps, even when they're not. You can't read intention, and all the emojis in the world are not going to help you solve that problem.
So sending an email to you that says something like, Carolyn, I'd really like to talk to you about XYZ, you might read it like, Carolyn, I really have to talk to you now, and I'm mad.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So if you have a concern, if you're doing anything other than sharing information or basic pleasantries, call them on the phone. And if you have to share something they need to see visually, send it to them as well so that they can see what you're talking about.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit then about what you have here, and that says we're going to do a little activity. So tell us a little bit about what you'd like us to do here.
Well, what I'm interested in doing is beginning to get to the fact that the conflict or the challenges we face in our lives are generally not brand new, shockingly different than anything else we've dealt with, and yet every day they push our buttons. And so what I'm interested in helping us do is planning ahead. We know we're going to bump into challenges, or we know we're going to work with a particular person who has a different style than we do, and it's challenging. I want you to plan ahead, think in advance, so that things are not a surprise and you don't have a knee-jerk reaction and say or do things that are not helpful in the moment. So choose a situation in which you could give some constructive feedback. This could be any situation where you'd like to call attention to a problem or a potential problem. Don't choose a situation that's been going on for a long time and has not improved. A situation like that may call for a more formal approach. So this harkens back to what I said about having the courage to deal with conflict. If we don't deal with it in the moment as it happens, it's going to go underground and fester.
It's going to become a chronic problem.
Exactly. And so if you can catch something before it turns into a problem or a bigger problem, you're doing yourself a big favor. And screwing up your courage to do that is assisted by doing your homework in advance. So think of a situation where you could give some constructive feedback to all of you out in our virtual environment. And then we're going to take you through the next steps.
Okay, perfect. So if any of you have, maybe an irritating experience with a coworker or subordinate, and you would like Carolyn to address it for you right now, just go ahead and type it into your box right there. We'll give you all a few minutes to do that. And I'm thinking about this too. So again, something that's not chronic, but something that, maybe is more of an irritation or something that happens, a common miscommunication, or any time where there would be an opportunity to help someone improve their performance or give some helpful feedback to them, where you'd like to call attention to something that may potentially become a problem or become chronic if not addressed. I'm thinking of a recent situation for myself, while we're allowing you guys time to put in any information that you'd like to provide, where I had asked an analyst to put in some additional information on our weekly progress reports. And 2 weeks go by and it's not included on there. And at this point I'm feeling pretty frustrated, and I want to go up to him and I want to say, why didn't you put that on there? I told you to do that. What would be the best way for me to handle this?
That's a great question, and we will take that step by step now. Let's see if we have an example, and if we don't, we'll use yours.
Sure. I'm not seeing anything in here, so we'll go ahead and use that one, and if anybody does have anything they want to input in there, we can definitely come back to it. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so the notion here is that you get what you project, and if you come in, sort of guns blazing, you're likely to create a defensive environment.
Mm-hmm.
And even if your words don't make that statement, your body language and your presence will, and that translates even through email and even through Skype. So you want to be sure that people are that you're operating from a place of strength. And one of the ways to do that is to take yourself through this process here. Just ask yourself, get yourself into a position where, it's in your long-term best interest to assume, and we've heard a lot about assumptions, that you shouldn't do them. There are some very useful assumptions that will make your life easier. One is that people are doing the best they can, even when you don't think it's good enough.
So instead of going into the situation and thinking they're intentionally failing, thinking that they're doing the best they can, and I could actually provide them with better support or maybe better direction, or if there's something that I can do to come and help them, rather than, let's call it, being accusatory.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And that's all about asking, People are naturally cooperative and helpful. Now, I know we have examples where we don't feel that's the case. If we go into a situation with that assumption in mind, though, we're much more open to problem solving rather than judging and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
The idea that people are rarely out to get you. They may be careless. They may not have followed through on all of the details that you were really interested in, but they're probably not intentionally trying to make your life hard.
Okay. So me coming in and saying, I'm getting for this promotion and I really need these reports to show my boss that I'm doing a good job, and they know that I want this job, and they're intentionally out to get me, it's probably not the most helpful, and what you're saying is it's rarely true.
Yeah. Exactly, and yet we believe the things we tell ourselves, and so we want to be telling ourselves constructive stuff. The last one is a fascinating one. People have all the resources they need to solve their own problems. The challenge is to help them access and organize these resources. Now, this is especially true in high-value experiences where people's emotions are running high, and that if we can help them get a handle on their emotions and calm down a little bit without saying calm down, we're much more likely to be resourceful and productive in that conversation. So this is where empathy and patience come in, really important.
So I'd like to break that down into two statements. The first is, and again, we want to assume, and what you're saying is don't assume that people have all the resources they need to solve their own problems, because they actually might need help to access or organize the resources together, or they don't even know how to use them.
Yeah.
Or in this example, maybe my ask wasn't clear enough, and rather than take action and potentially give me something I wasn't looking for, there hadn't been an opportunity to clarify.
Yeah, and so when we are open to the possibility that if the environment is right and I'm sharing useful information, et cetera, that they will come to a place where you can be more resourceful together. Okay, so part of your homework is, when you know you'd like to share a concern with someone, is, let's see, what is it? Okay, I think we probably, in interest of time here, we'll probably just talk through this. If you've done the same thing over and over again expecting different results, if you said to a person the same thing and they still haven't delivered what you've asked them to, then you probably need to do something different. If your goal is to win or be right in this conversation, very often in conflict, we're already upset. And we want what we want, and we want it right now, and this is how you have to do it. And if our goal is to win or be right, if it has to happen our way, then we're probably not ready to have that conversation. Because unless our goal is to solve the problem and maintain the relationship, we're going to create a chronic problem.
And so I think the goal for us in our virtual and with our remote teams is we do want to solve the problem, and we do want to maintain and enhance the relationship whenever possible.
Exactly.
Because we all want those high-performing teams, the ones that are putting out the deliverables that are necessary for success.
And the challenge is that very often, when we get upset, we get a little righteously indignant, and it's kind of fun to be righteously indignant. It feels good for a minute. And the long-term consequences are not in our best interest. So how do we catch ourselves before we jump into that righteous indignation?
Right.
How do we get to maintaining, solving a problem and maintaining
take time out to
relationship?
manage yourself instead of managing the situation.
Exactly.
So instead of getting that email that makes me angry, or the voicemail that I heard that I was like, that is not at all what I told you to do and not what I wanted, instead of just hitting the reply button and shooting off a couple of terse sentences, take a moment and say, wait a minute here.
Exactly.
How do I really feel, and what purpose is this really going to accomplish?
Exactly. Okay, so again, do your homework. What do you want to have happen as a result of this conversation? You need to be very clear about why you're having this conversation. Is it just to get emotionally even, with this person who made your life hard, or do you really want to solve a problem? So think, are your intentions positive? What are the specific facts of the situation? And when I say specific facts, I do mean specific facts. You made me mad is not a specific fact.
What?
So you need to be really clear. Last Thursday in the morning, we had a conversation, and I asked that you complete these charts to put into our next report, and that didn't happen. Okay, so that's very specific. It's important that you know them firsthand. You don't want to say, well, so-and-so told me that so-and-so said that you didn't do this. Right.
But sometimes, and not to get too much off of a segue, sometimes you are managing a conflict between some of your team members. And that will be, team member A will say, hey, I'm not getting along with such and such because of this. And team member B will say, well, they never even told me that they wanted that.
Exactly.
And so is it best to get everyone on the phone together at that, or do you try to manage those relationships individually before bringing everyone together?
Initially, I'd manage them individually and say, my first question when when one of my staff comes to me with a question like that is, have you talked to so-and-so? And that's where the next steps about giving the feedback come in, is helping my staff develop the courage and the communication skills to address some of those at the basic level first on their own.
Absolutely.
And then if they can't do that, then we'll come together and discuss it more broadly. But initially, I'm encouraging them to use the same steps that we're talking about here.
That's great.
Okay. So again, doing your homework. What specifically are the facts? What are your feelings? Very important that you know how you feel. I was really upset. It was very frustrating to me because I anticipated that these data would be in this report, and they weren't. And as a result, I wasn't able to share them with some important stakeholders.
Right. Absolutely.
Can you think of more than one way to solve the problem? What solutions do you have? In this case, if you have only one way to solve the problem, you may still be in win or be right mode. So take the time to think, well, how do I solve this problem? What can we do next time so that this doesn't happen? Right. And it may be that, I know I asked you that in passing after a meeting. Maybe I need to follow up with an email, or maybe you could follow up with an email, something that allows both sides to participate. And then, how might the other person respond? You want to prepare for that. This is where that courage piece comes in, because they could get all hot and bothered and say, you didn't say that to me. You didn't ask for what I did what you asked me to do, whatever it is. They could come at. More often than not, though, if you've answered these first few questions very carefully, the next steps of actually initiating that conversation are going to go very smoothly. So preparing for they might be defensive. They might be hurt. They might say, oh, you know what, I totally forgot that. They may be absolutely conciliatory, but you want to you want to figure out how to respond to their potential reactions. And then how might you prepare for their response? Okay. Giving feedback constructively includes determining an appropriate time to give the feedback. And you'll want to ask the other person, I have something I'd like to talk to you about. Is this a good time?
I think that's so important for us sometimes, especially we might not know what our team schedules look like or where they're at, and if we just call them on the phone and they're picking their kids up from school because they're in Eastern time zone and I'm in Pacific time zone, and for me it's a perfect time, but for them they're like, I'm just trying to end my day here. Yeah. And if I just launch right into it without saying, hey, I want to talk to you about something, is this a good time? It doesn't even give them an opportunity to prepare. No, so you're setting yourself up for some real strong emotions. Yeah, absolutely.
Open positively and share your goal. And that is, something along the lines of, I know we both really want this particular project to be successful. I've been so pleased with our relationship, and I want to continue that positive move forward. And then say something that brings you to the same side of the table. I have a concern about a conversation we had last week. I thought, and then you do the next. Focus on the facts of the situation. You know, I know we both want to be effective, and that we want this newsletter or whatever it was to go out and with accurate data. Last week when I asked you to complete this particular task, I expected the data to be in this week's report, and it wasn't. And that was really, so be as specific as possible. Explain the factual and emotional impact of the situation. The challenge was that because it wasn't in there, the data wasn't in the report, I was embarrassed because I had shared with John and Sarah that information would be in the report, and so I was really embarrassed and stressed, actually, because that information was critical to the conversation we were having.
And even as you're saying this right now, I feel kind of bad. I feel like, oh, well, I didn't want you to feel that way. Yeah. That wasn't my intention, and it makes me want to, I don't feel like you're attacking me at all, and I think that's the point,
because
right?
I'm taking ownership for my stuff.
And your own feelings.
I'm not saying you didn't do what you were supposed to do. I'm saying that I asked for this and it didn't happen.
And that gives me the opportunity to come back and say, well, you didn't actually give me a deadline. I didn't understand that it needed to be in the next week reports, and I'd already prepared them for that day, or whatever the case may be.
And this is exactly where you put that space for the other person to respond. So go ahead. So you're going to share the factual and emotional results of that particular situation, and then I'm going to check in, and I'm going to say, so Kendra, how does that feel for you? Do you remember our conversation? And now you have the opportunity to do just what you did. I didn't realize there was a deadline. I really, in whatever was going on for you. And
I think in my experience, and you folks out there, you tell me if this happens at all with your virtual and remote teams, is more often than not, it seems just a miscommunication, which again just goes right back to that. How are the people that we work with, how do they learn and how do they communicate? Because if I'm working with someone that really needs specific guidelines and details and they want it written out in an email, and I just told them in passing, hey, wouldn't it be great if we had this? I can't expect them to follow up on that, because that doesn't seem like a very clear direction on what they should be doing or not.
Right.
And so checking in with them and asking for their perceptions in this process, again, is allowing us to keep the situation from escalating in the first place, which is what we want.
Right. Right. So it may be that this is not a great time to have this conversation. They may say, you know, I'd love to talk to you about this. I get that you're stressed. I've got a meeting to go to, or I've got other things that I need to address. You may decide for whatever reason that this is not the greatest time. Or it may have pushed a button, and they may be really upset, and you may recognize that, wow, you know, it wasn't my intention to upset you, and this is an important conversation. Can I come back and talk? Can we get together at 3? Or can we get back together tomorrow morning and see what we can do to problem solve this?
That's great. And so important to make a specific time rather than let's just talk about this later.
Oh, yeah, no.
Because later might be in an hour or next week or in a month, and a month later, who knows what's happened with that situation.
Yeah. And again, that courage piece, you don't want it to fall off the map. You want to be, again, back to accountability and trust. If you say you're going to do something, you need to do it. And that builds that accountability and trust. So even if it's coming back to what will be a challenging conversation, you're demonstrating that accountability and trust.
Absolutely.
Then you have the opportunity, most of the time, you're going to get to finish this conversation now. So propose a solution. What I'm thinking would be helpful in this particular case is that I realize now that sharing that with you verbally in the hall was probably not most effective. What I'm going to do next time is follow up with an email. Would that work for you?
That sounds great.
Great.
And would be really helpful.
And then would be really. So focus on problem solving, not on attacking each other and who didn't do what. And then close positively. So, Kendra, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for talking through this with me. I think that from now on, it sounds like we'll be clearer about what we expect from each other, and things will go smoother.
And we would hope all our interactions with our coworkers were as easy, right?
Exactly. And the planning ahead and these steps will take you well in that direction.
And so here's a great quote that we have that says, when feedback, when given well, should not alienate the receiver of the feedback, but should motivate them to perform better. So this is a great example in my exchange with Carolyn that I didn't feel alienated at all. I felt like we were on the same team. And I think ultimately that's our biggest goal with our teams is we are on the same team. We do have the same goal, and we want to motivate our subordinates and others in our organization to perform their best and better. And so ensuring that we are approaching feedback with a concerted effort rather than flippantly or in the moment will make sure that we're really, it's a constructive session.
Yeah. Sarcasm is not feedback. We hope people will take hints. And we hope that being sarcastic or dropping little hints is all, and they just don't.
Yeah,
they
absolutely.
Just don't.
So we talked a little bit about understanding how our team learns and communicates, and how we can utilize those different types of learners to provide better feedback and help motivate them to do better in the future when those situations arise. And that really points to helping our team with each other and overall develop accountability and trust. And of course, those are a couple of different areas here that are important. Tell us a little bit about these three, and then what our focus is going to be on.
Well, as you can imagine, commitment and transparency, being committed to sharing as much useful information as possible is critical. Developing collegial relationships, and in this case, we're going to talk specifically about giving appreciation and recognition, because very often, in an office environment or in an in-person environment, you pass people in the hall and smile and give recognition, just that it was great to see you in the meeting, or I appreciate what you said. That happens on a daily basis. Virtually, it has to be much more intentional, and it has to happen for this trust and accountability to grow.
People in the office, you have what you call water cooler talk.
Yeah.
So you develop those relationships just by proximity.
Exactly.
Whereas in a virtual environment, a lot of the times when people will hear from someone is when they need something from them or when they've done something wrong.
Yeah.
And so that's a myth for us.
It sure is.
Absolutely.
And what we know about our neurology is that when other people smile, when we see other people smile, when we smile, our oxytocin levels, our feel-good hormones increase.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're by yourself dealing with your computer, you don't have that human interaction that elevates those hormone levels to make you feel good. So you need to find other ways to make that happen, to feel connected.
Yeah. And there's a lot of reasons why we struggle with giving that recognition and that appreciation with our virtual teams. I think of probably the biggest reason that I do is, I grew up in the generation of no news is good news, right?
Yep.
So if I don't hear from someone, everything's fine.
Yep.
But there's a couple of other reasons why that might be a struggle for us with our team.
Yeah, and one of the things about giving recognition is that we think, well, that's not my personality. I whatever it is. So take a look at this list. It says why we don't give recognition, and these are all baloney. I keep meaning to give people recognition, but I'm just too busy. The opportunity always seems to slip by. So we're going to ask you to make time. Take that 15 seconds to send somebody an email with a little smiley face on it saying, thanks for something. People know when things are going well. They don't need to hear it from me.
That's sort of the no news is good news,
No news is
right?
good news, and at the same time, virtually, it's critical that you share positive experiences and just let them know, I was thinking about you today. That idea you had last week in the meeting really made it easier for me to do such and such. So, again, these are all fallacies. I save my recognition for really big accomplishments. That way it means more. Well, actually, what would that tell you if somebody waits and waits it's like, I've been working hard for the last year.
And I have to do something really big with fireworks in order to be recognized.
People want to feel valued on a daily basis. Not just want, we need to feel valued on a daily basis. And if I can contribute to your feeling valued, you're going to be a much more effective employee for me.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to do that as often as reasonable. Now, it's all going to be sincere. It's all going to be very specific. And let's take it to the next step.
add your own there. Like, what is keeping you folks there on the phone from giving feedback and recognition in your team? So what can we do to do this?
Great. Very important. Think, again, do your homework. Think in advance. Identify an opportunity for giving recognition. You know you're going to a meeting next week, and Kendra is making her first presentation at a large staff meeting. There's an opportunity. You know you're having a phone call with someone you haven't talked to in a long time, and yet some of their reports have been very useful to you recently. think ahead. Who are you going to be interacting with, and how does that behavior, you want to reinforce behavior that supports the mission of your organization. So think about it. What are they doing that I can notice that they're doing that has an impact on the mission of the organization? So describe the behavior as immediately and as specifically as possible. Again, that specific is critical. You did a really good job. Well, hearing that I did a really good job doesn't tell me what specifically to do again to make a difference.
Yeah, it's so generic.
Yeah.
I could be I do a million things a day.
Exactly.
What specifically did I do a good job in?
So I really appreciate the level of detail in your report, particularly with last month's sales goals, because it allowed me to have some really useful conversations with the sales reps. And then, so I've described it specifically. Now, how the behavior makes a difference. The fact that you were able to do that gave me the ability to give useful information to my sales reps in a timely manner. And not only does that make them feel more motivated and effective, it meets our bottom line. It increases our bottom line.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to tell you how that behavior that you exhibited impacted me and our organization. There are also lots of other fun ways to connect and grow. Always start your virtual meetings with a check-in. Ask them to share something they're happy about or proud of that happened last week, or something that they're looking forward to. Get everybody's voice in the room. And
this doesn't always have to be professional, right?
No,
it could be some personal item as well.
And
my 10-year-old just had a birthday last week, and we had a lot of fun.
Yes, and it doesn't have to be long. And again, if you know you've got people who are storytellers, make sure that you let everybody know in advance. This check-in gives us about 30 seconds apiece, and auditories are perfectly capable of telling you short stories. But if you don't create some parameters for them, they'll want to tell you a bigger story. So again, back to the learning style.
And how great is this? Not just as a manager, you have opened up the space for them to be recognized and feel appreciated, but you've also created an environment where the team is getting to know each other, and where the team has the opportunity to just in proximity say like, oh, that's really fun, and get to know each other. Hey, I have a grandchild that's 10. Suddenly you've really bridge that gap and help them feel closer with each other.
Exactly right.
And this is so easy. How many of you guys could just start your meetings whenever you're on the phone, even if it's with 2 or 3 folks?
Yeah.
Say, hey, I'd just like to just take a minute and have everybody go around for 30 seconds or so and tell me something that you're really proud of or something that happened to you that made you really happy since we talked last.
Yeah, and this is very, very important because we like to lead to business. We like to solve the problem. We like to fix things right away.
That is me.
And yes, a lot of us are that way. And at the same time, even for us, whether we admit it or not, meeting each other at that human level allows us to move to business more smoothly and problem solve more effectively. Another thing you can do is ask the group to share something they're grateful for. This doesn't have to get too deep. They can be grateful for their hairdryer or their first morning coffee, anything that makes them happy. What your goal here is that, again, neurologically, we know this to be a fact. If I can move your neurology to a happy place, you're going to be much more creative. You're going to be much more easygoing and easy to deal with.
Wait a minute. I just had an epiphany. So what you're telling me is if I can start off with happy thoughts, even if the people came into the meeting with like, I'm so glad we're having this weekly call that we're on. I can't wait to complain about X, Y, and Z. This has really been driving me nuts.
Yep.
It can put us in a different headspace to where suddenly we want to collaborate and problem solve rather than it's just become a session where we're all complaining.
Absolutely. And this is neurologically true. This is not a myth anymore. We know that this is how our brains work. Invite the participants to commit to a random act of kindness and report back to the team. Give yourself an ongoing conversation. What have you done? So these are wonderful, fun ways to connect and grow.
And kind of another really great one, and I love this next slide because it's just a really great recap on what we went over today, which was communicating effectively, managing conflicts and overcome challenges, and developing accountability and trust. We'd like to open it up now for any questions that anyone has that they'd like to ask Caroline about anything that we went over specifically or generally. I know sometimes in these sessions we've had some great answers to your most pressing problems. And again, if you just want to recap, really wrap it up for us here about what we went over and how these 3 things are really going to impact our relationships with our virtual teams.
Well, I think particularly with learning styles, recognizing that people's differences are so legitimate, and we tend to be so judgy. You know, visuals are judgy to auditories because they tell us we're very judgy, and then that clouds our ability to participate effectively with each other. And now that we can be clearer, this is a legitimate way to share information, and for me to be effective, I need to flex a little bit, and just recognizing that it's information gathering rather than character flogging.
Yes,
so I think that's really important. The courage to give and receive feedback, I can't tell you how important it is, and not only for the problem solving that occurs in an organization, but for your own self-esteem, to stand up for the things that are important to you and be able to share that information. And then, again, treating yourself, when we get to accountability and trust and showing recognition, treat yourself as well as we're asking you to treat everybody else. Be as open to your learning style differences and your preferences. Be open to other people's feedback as well as your own. Treat yourself as with the appreciation that other people need to be effective. I think that really is what ties it all together.
This is great, and I think just some of these, it feels really basic on a level. It's like, well, of course, right? We all want to feel respected. We all want to communicate well. We all want to feel appreciated. But we can really forget that, and you said a comment earlier where we really get stuck in the business aspect of things sometimes, and especially for those of us that have, really big responsibilities in managing those virtual teams. And what you said is if we take a step back and focus on that individual and those communication challenges and learning preferences, it will help us take care of the big stuff.
Absolutely.
Again, Carolyn Waterfall with us here today. We encourage you to connect with her on LinkedIn. There's her personal contact information right there. We got a great quote from the Multnomah County Aging and Disability Services that she worked with, where she really practiced the art of team development, and their team was really able to flourish and excel under her leadership. She's given us some great insights today. We'll stay on for just another minute or two in case you do have any other questions. But this presentation slides are available for download right there on the Attachments tab underneath your viewing screen, as well as that visual, auditory, kinesthetic learning preferences scorecard. If you haven't had a chance to download that and check it out, I really encourage you to do so and use it with your own teams. It's really, really helpful. As I was going through there, I was like, hey, I can think of, Bob that I work with, and he meets these check boxes, and it really, as Carolyn said, everybody has a preference. Everybody uses these three different preferences and these ways that they learn and communicate, but everyone sort of leans toward a preference, and it can help you to see how your team makeup is and help you understand what direction and guidance that you can provide for them in interacting with each other and interacting with you as you guys are working on really creating cohesive virtual teams and really high performance remote teams.
Well, Kendra, it has been my pleasure. Thank you very much, and I hope please do contact me if you have any questions or ideas. I'd love to hear from you.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. Have a great afternoon, everyone.